Back in 2002, during a merger case between Pepco and Connective, the People's Council at the time, Elizabeth Noel, decided to add as one of the settlement agreement points that Pepco would fund a smart meter pilot program to the tune of about $2 million.
She saw that we were going down this road, so let's take this opportunity to look at it in a clear, concise manner and evaluate it before we take the final leap.
Well, because this was money that was coming straight from the utilities, shareholders, and there was no negative impact or possibility of a negative impact on the public interest, it was easier for collaborations to happen.
Once that money was set aside, we had to come up with a way of running a pilot, figuring out, okay, how are we going to do this? Who are we going to hire to do the work? And most of all, what do we want to find out?
I had heard about the coming of AMI, smart meter, et cetera, through my travels, in previous years. And then when I said that I was actually on a board and we're actually doing it, then people just kind of took notice at that point in time and said, hey, listen, not only is it coming, but we're a participant, we're there.
It was a collaboration of 5 organizations, and you never see this. It started out with the Public Service Commission. You had 2 consumer groups, CUB and the People's Council. You had the labor union, which was very collaborative. And then finally you had the utility, of course. So that was Pepco.
And that was the beginning of PowerCentsDC.
There's a lot different about being a utility in the nation's capital, which means that the infrastructure that we're responsible for maintaining and providing service through provides service to the federal government, including the White House and all branches of the federal government. In addition to that, because it is the nation's capital, there's also the seat of politics. And so there's a political aspect of what we do in terms of where if we do something the same way that another utility may do in another part of the country, it's under a slightly different view. It gets more heightened attention, especially if it's a misstep, and it requires for us to be a lot more nimble and responsive in fixing it.
In the first initial meetings we had, it was kind of a feeling out process. We still had our own, conceptions about each other, our own, like what are they thinking, what do they want out of this?
Here was a group of people who were used to seeing each other in a hearing room where they're facing at each other and sometimes asking some not so comfortable questions.
People will not initially check their egos at the door. People are going to come in with their egos. But it's important because everybody is ultimately working toward the same common goal, that you're able to check people's motives against what the overall goal is.
All of a sudden we're thrown into this room with a chance to really do something good, and it was really refreshing to be able to talk to each other face to face without a court reporter and without worrying about anything being made public or going on record. We just simply let our hair down and talked about, okay, how are we going to do this?
And then the more we talked and the more we started to find common ground, it started to grow. And I think the relationship started to flourish. And I think that's when a lot of the ideas that we had started to come together in the pilot.
First it was all, the numbers and the bills and things like this, but early on in the program it got down to the, how the transmission, the radio towers and things like that. And then, I kind of pulled up to the table at that point, and, there was, because that's what I had been responsible for.
We got the best of each of the parties. So the best of their experience, the best of their thinking, the best of their ideas. So we got some great creativity.
Because of the credibility of each of us was at stake in this pilot program, consumers, I think, may have given us the benefit of the doubt, knowing that everyone who needed to be in the room and on board was on board.
We wanted something that would be bulletproof in terms of reputation, integrity, and experimental design.
So they had an initial meeting at the Pepco headquarters in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, we held in-person meetings, which is very unusual for a program like this, and surprised us by the level of attendance. We had almost a quarter of the participants come to the community meeting.
There was probably about 40 to 50 people in attendance, plus representatives from the group who ran the pilot study and representatives from Pepco.
And what we did was, it was fairly straightforward. We had some refreshments.
The introductory letter said, we're going to have some snacks there, and you think the snacks are going to be chips and whatever, but they actually had a full buffet spread. So right there I said, okay, this is probably going to work out fine.
And we did a brief presentation, overview of the program, and the key thing was the Q&A.
I was a little skeptical because it was supposed to be a program about using energy wisely and saving money while doing so, but it came directly from the power company.
The idea of actually having your energy usage tracked in detail and having that reported to you was attractive in itself. And the second thing was they were going to give you kind of a financial incentive, albeit it was a small financial incentive, to change your behavior at some point during the day.
That's the top thing. That's the most important thing. Save me some money.
At that time we started, we were the only jurisdiction that was testing all 3 pricing programs in one jurisdiction. We wanted this pilot to be different than any other pilot that had come before us.
It kind of gave us an opportunity to see how under difficult times people would respond to maybe certain price signals. How would they interact in a situation where we're being conscientious of cost with new technology?
I think they were trying to accomplish ways to try to save energy because that's a big topic right now.
So we had 3 prices in the program: the critical peak price, critical peak rebate, and hourly pricing. With the first of those, you have these critical peak events. 15 days a year, 4 hours a day, the price goes very high. People are notified a day ahead so they know when these are occurring.
The text message part was fantastic because everyone has a cell phone, and the text message would come to us, and I would be asked to change my power usage, and I was willing to do so.
With critical peak rebate, you don't get that discount. You stay on the same price plan, and then when these events happen, if you go below what you otherwise would have used on those days, then you earn a rebate. If you don't want to play, you just use normally and you pay your regular bill.
Well, mainly they talked about the telephone calls that we would receive when it was peak and when it was non-peak. And believe it or not, I don't even know what that means, peak or non-peak, but I just know what makes me comfortable.
Now, hourly pricing sounds scary, but it actually is very similar to many things we experience. Hourly pricing changes every hour because that's when the wholesale markets change.
When I knew that the power was going to cost more, say between 2 and 6 p.m., then I went and turned things off. I started flipping switches, save the money.
The impact may seem small for a person who lives alone and has an apartment, but I think that's huge. We all have tons of things nowadays, tons of electronics plugged in, and I wasn't aware of till I signed on for this program that they actually use energy. If it's plugged in, even if it's not turned on, it's using energy.
But I'd heard studies about, well, dynamic pricing is going to be bad for low-income consumers, or they don't have enough load to reduce or to shift. But I really wanted to see, and I think the results surprised a lot of us because I think overall they were almost statistically even with the non-low income in terms of the amount of the reduction. So I think that was one of the flags we could raise from this pilot to show nationally that this is something that here's how low-income consumers in the District of Columbia responded.
After the pilot, we surveyed all the participants, and one of the questions we asked them is, what did you do to reduce peak usage? The other thing we did was we compared the 2 groups, the low-income customers with the rest of the participants. And you can see in most of these categories the results are very similar. And this is interesting. You see a much higher number for low income because it just shows how interested some of these people are in trying to reduce their peak and save some money on this kind of program.
By and large, I think what people are finding is that the results from the pilots overall are pretty consistent and telling us, in general, yes, customers really do respond to smart pricing when they're given the opportunity.
As a result of the collaboration and what we learned from this pilot, that the $2 million, I can't have an adjective strong enough to describe how great it was spent.
It answered some questions, but also left some unanswered, which is why the informal relationship and lines of communication that we've built may bear fruit in the future.
But I believe with this type of collaborative approach, it will certainly be, from an economic standpoint, done a lot more cheaply. And from a speed of execution standpoint, I think it would be executed a lot more quickly.
we asked customers whether or not they would like to stay on PowerCentsDC rates or go back to the traditional flat Pepco rates. And by a margin of something like 13-1, customers said, oh, please, we'd love to be able to stay on PowerCentsDC rates. We love the program. Please don't stop it. This has just been a wonderful experience.